So if you've just got some in-ears, you might have realized it's not just as easy as putting them in, plugging them into something, and you're good to go. We need to figure out what that something is and how you're going to get everything set up to fit your needs. So that's what we're going to cover in today's video. Now, previously, my experience with in-ears, when I was at college and then when I was working on cruise ships, I always had something set up that I could just plug into. So there was like Avion mixers, Behringer mixers, wireless packs. There was always something there for me to plug into, and I literally just needed to show up with my in-ears and maybe an adapter. But now that I'm gigging in smaller venues, I'm taking my sample pad with me, my iPad maybe for backing tracks. I need a bit more flexibility here, and I need something that's my own that I can take with me from gig to gig. So let me get into today showing you exactly what I use to set up for a nice simple setup for in-ear monitors for a drummer. So starting with the in-ear monitors, you need to plug them into something that's getting a signal of the band that you're playing in. So first and foremost, you want to hear everybody else. Typically the drums are loud enough where with your in-ears in, you don't really need to hear them. It's nice if you can get maybe a little bit of kick and snare in there, but you don't really need to. But you do need to make sure that you hear everybody else, of course, right? So in the simplest form, all you need is something like a stage wedge monitor. You can unplug the XLR from the back of that and plug that into something, right? So your simplest thing is going to be like a Behringer P1 or a Behringer P2. And in that case, it's just controlling the volume out to your headphones and you plug in that single XLR in the back. But we need more flexibility than that as drummers. We're going to be plugging in things like sample pads, maybe an iPad. So this takes us to the mixer. Now, the mixer allows you to take multiple signals, combine them, control the volume of each signal, and output that to your headphones. So really, you're in control of the sound that you hear. So the mixer I'm using today is the Yamaha AG06 Mk2. There's also the AG03 in the same range, and they're marketed more as streaming mixers for, you know, mixing yourself as you're streaming something, but they're really, really good for live mixing, and we'll get into some of these reasons in a minute. Now, the AG06 has 2 XLR inputs, the AG03 only has 1, but with the 2 inputs, you know, most of the time you're going to be running 1 XLR with your feed of the band, but in nicer venues and things, you can actually get 2 XLR inputs, so you've got that flexibility, and there's plenty of other inputs to run everything else that we need. So let's get into the setup. So for my live gigging setup, I keep channels 1 and 2 free for my feed of the band. Like I said, typically this will be 1 XLR input, and that's my mix of the rest of the band, but I've got 2 available should I need to down the line. So it's nice to have that flexibility here. I've also got my SPD-SX running into inputs 3 and 4, so that we've got a stereo sound there, right, and I can control the volume of both left and right together. And then I've got my iPad connected via USB, which kind of acts as a 7th input, because this is a mixer that can be connected to a computer or a tablet, right? They're really pushing the mobile here for the tablets and phones. So it's nice and easy to connect to an iPad. And for this way, you know, I can run backing tracks from Fourscore and things like that. So that's my setup, and let's dive deeper into this to show you how more of the connections are working here. So to connect my iPad to the mixer, I'm using the confusingly named Apple Camera Connection Kit. It's not only for cameras, it works for anything with USB. So it's USB 3, it's got 2 sort of connections on one end, which is USB 3 and Lightning, and then they sort of sum down to Lightning, and that's what plugs into your iPad. So for the Lightning port that's free from the adapter, I've got my battery bank plugging into that, so that supplies power to both the iPad and the mixer, which is great because it makes it this portable setup. And of course I've got the mixer connected via USB to the iPad. So that's what's going on there to connect the iPad to the mixer. And pro tip, if you have one of the newer iPads, which is pretty much every iPad that's out today, and if it's got a USB-C connection on it, all you need is a USB-C to C cable to connect the iPad directly to the mixer. This connects it, and because USB-C can pass power and data, you don't need that battery bank, so the iPad itself will power the mixer. But in my case, my iPad is actually 7 years old. I've got the really, really old one, the first larger size Pro, still going well by the way. So I'm stuck with Lightning for the time being. But if you have that new one, you can get just a USB-C cable, which makes life even simpler. Now for the Roland SPD-SX, and this would work for any sample pad, I've got the signal coming actually straight out of the headphone output of the SPD-SX, and then I'm using a cable that I usually use for triggers. So you might already know on the back of the Roland there's 2 trigger inputs. Those are stereo, so those can be broken to 2 mono triggers that sum to the stereo input. So I'm kind of using that cable in reverse here. I'm going stereo out of the headphone output on the SPD-SX, which breaks to mono left and right, and I've got that plugged into channels 3 and 4 on my mixer. This was the easiest way to get a stereo signal. You know, I tried going from the sub out, but it's not as easy to get the click and everything routed there. The click is already pre-routed to go to the headphone out. So because this is a simple setup, I like to make life easy, right? Who wants to make life hard? I'm just going out of the headphone out. All my mixes, like the click is always going to go there, and then that leaves the main output free on the SPD-SX to go to front of house. And of course they're not going to get any click in that mix. So for channels 3 and 4, I'm getting click coming in from the SPD-SX and all my sounds that I'm triggering on the SPD-SX as well. You could also use the aux in that this mixer has, but for me there's not as much flexibility here because you've got to control the volume from the SPD-SX itself. You're not actually able to do this on the mixer for the aux input only, but everything else you can. So that's the reason that I didn't go to the aux in. So with that lightning adapter, the one that's got lightning and USB, make sure you get the official Apple one, because there are plenty of third-party ones that are cheaper, but Apple can brick these with a software update. They might not be supported down the line if you update your iPad, and that would be a nightmare on a gig. So if you buy the Apple one, it is always going to work with whatever software version you're on in the future. And make sure as well to get the one that has both USB-C and Lightning on there, so you can power as well over the one adapter. There are some that are sold that are just USB, but then you're not able to charge both things simultaneously, so make sure you get the right one. So the fact that you can power both the iPad and the mixer from the battery bank is really handy, because you don't need to be hunting down as many outlets when you're on a gig. You know, you might still need your one outlet for your sample pad, so for me my SPD-SX, but you don't need an outlet for an iPad and then a third outlet for the mixer. Some mixers you do need that, so this was something that was great about this one. It has USB-C and it can be powered directly from that. And like I said earlier, if you've got the newer iPads, you don't even need a battery bank at all. You can just make sure your iPad's fully charged, and that will also charge the mixer. This is a cool one. You can actually record your mix from the mixer as you're playing a gig. So all you need is an app that records, so something like GarageBand or any other kind of DAW that you've got on your iPad, and it sees the mixer. You can get channel 1, channel 2, or the stereo mix. So the stereo mix is probably what you're going to want here. One thing to note, if you're running click, you are going to get click in this recording because it's what's coming into your ears that you're recording. So just be aware of that. Some people always want like a nice recording to put with a video, but if you've got click, something just to be aware of. This one could be a lifesaver because there's always something you forget on a gig, and the fact that this mixer has both a 3.5mm headphone jack and a 1/4 inch, if you forget that little adapter when you go to your gig, then this is like a backup, right? So you can plug your in-ears in. The Shure ones that I use the Shure 215s. You know, it's got 3.5mm jack on there, and I always have to use an adapter to plug it into my interface or a mixer or anything that I'm working with. So if you forget that, or you've left it plugged in your interface at home or something, you know, you've got that flexibility with this mixer to where you can just use the 3.5mm without any adapter. There is an additional adapter that Yamaha make that screws on the bottom of this mixer, and then you can mount it on a mic stand. So this is something I think I'm going to pick up. It's kind of a shame it's not included. Like, it would be nice if the bottom of the mixer just had that thread on there, so you could just sort of screw it onto a mic stand. But it's nice to have that option because, you know, as a drummer we sit down, so typically we want it kind of low. If you don't have something around you like a chair or a table or something to set this on, having a mic stand is a really clean setup. You can have your sample pad off to the side, the mixer just underneath it at that right height that you want it at. So that's something cool to be aware of that kind of goes hand in hand with the mixer. And me personally, I really like the white color of this mixer. Everything's black. Everything I have is black. It's crazy, like all hardware, everything apart from, you know, chrome hardware for drums, but everything else is black. Mic stands, you know, camera gear, everything's black. So the fact that this comes in white, it just makes it stand out. Typically you're on a dark stage and, you know, just having the white there beside you just really makes it pop, so it's easier to see, easier to find. It's not distractingly bright, but it's just a little bit brighter against everything else being black. And that's everything I'm using for my simple in-ear setup with this mixer. Now this mixer is the AG06 Mk2. Like I mentioned earlier, there's also the AG03 Mk2. So the main difference is it just has one XLR input. So if you're not bothered about the extra flexibility and you want more of a compact setup, that's probably the one to go for you. It also has a fader to control the volume for that XLR input versus the knobs on the AG06. So if you like that too, that's something to consider. So let me know what you're using for your in-ear setup. Are you using this mixer, a different mixer? Are you using nothing at all? You know, let me know what you're using. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
One, two, ready, play.